Hello there. What is going on, everyone? We've got ourselves some new Star Wars Legion rules. The new rule book is posted to atomicmassgames.com. It's called the Star Wars Legion Core Rulebook. It is basically the new version of the rules reference guide. You may have been familiar with the rules reference guide. It was how you kind of looked up all those individual keywords and specific mechanics, and it's all been condensed into a smaller core rule book. And it's on atomicmassgames.com right now. So I'll put a link down in the video description below where you can go here and check this stuff out. There's also a Galactic Conquest event rules. This is basically just the new tournament document. And we're going to talk about that. I'll do that first because we really want to talk about the rule book. This is just a 3-page document, or maybe 4 pages, I guess. But it's got the silhouettes in there, and it's just got some of the new stuff, and it's got a lot of standard things like judges are what now called consulars, and and so some things like that, like tiebreakers, and all that stuff is in there. Like, I don't think there's a whole lot of particularly interesting new stuff in here. It's mostly pretty standardized stuff to kind of reflect the silhouette and the rules changes for the new rule set. What is more interesting is the new rule book. And we're going to go through some of this. There's a lot here, folks. And I know a lot of people are looking for like a too long didn't read sort of version. So I'm going to... this isn't going to be a short video because there's a ton of small changes. I'll cover some of the more significant changes, and then I'll talk about some of the smaller changes that I think are going to have a little bit of a bigger impact. But I definitely think you should check this document out and read it for yourself when you have time. There's so much here that the whole book has been rewritten. So it's not just like they've taken the RRG and added a couple of updated paragraphs in blue text. It's a whole new document. And it streamlines a lot of stuff. Now, there are some changes in here that are going to have some impact on your games. But there are also, I'd say, a lot of changes that just feel normal and like, okay, this is just more of a streamlining on the way we thought it was all along, or the way it should have been all along. Like, one noteworthy thing is you can't snipe somebody in a closed transport anymore with Din Djarin and that Amban rifle. You can't draw a line of sight into a closed transport. And you probably never should have been able to do that, right? And so it was just a lot of like little things like that have been fixed. And so there's a whole lot of stuff like that in this rules reference guide, but there's also some bigger rules changes, and we've already talked about 4 of them. We've already seen the things like the elimination of clamber, and this new silhouette tools and things like that. So we'll go through some of this stuff that I think is pretty interesting. There's some of its keywords. Some of it is some things that are going to affect the way some of the new units are, like the Dark Troopers and Moff Gideon, and a lot of that. And although there's probably still some things that are outstanding, we're gonna talk about this rulebook. I'm gonna run through some of it. I definitely would suggest when you're looking at this, Control F will be your friend, because you'll be able to search for specific keywords. You're like, hey, what does scale do? And they were talking about changing. We'll get to that. One thing I think is interesting, though, is on this book, this is effective immediately, right? This went into effect like last night, but it's version 2.5. So like, that's so strange, because it makes me think like, wait a second, I didn't even know we were at Legion 2.0 yet. Maybe we were all along. I guess I just hadn't paid that much attention to the specific version numbers of the rule books. Maybe it was Clone Wars that brought us to 2.0, and it wasn't really hailed as a 2.0. It still feels like it's pretty standard Legion. I don't know if there's been any changes that make it feel like a complete massive new edition, but I guess not all new editions have to be overly sweeping. So this is kind of like a 2.5 edition, and so we've got a credits page here in the rulebook, which is pretty interesting. One of the things that I think is particularly funny is like assistant to the creative director. I think that's just a funny little Office reference. So, but yeah, you got all your credits and stuff right there, and then you have a pretty interesting table of contents here. They don't seem to have hyperlinks, and in the old FFG books, you used to have links where you could just kind of click on them and it would go straight to it. But this is definitely something that seems like it would be able to be printed out and included in new versions of the game and stuff like that. It's definitely like that same high quality rulebook that we've seen a lot of photos in here. It looks like it's put together very easily and clean, and so as far as just a rulebook, it looks pretty good. That's like, this is first glance, and again, first glance. Now this is all gonna be like my initial pass at it. I think this is probably gonna take weeks to pour through, and we're gonna find little things here and there, and like, oh, well, that contradicts this. Like, there's probably gonna be some things that we find, but I think on a first glance, it's pretty good. And so I want to jump to a couple of interesting things. So I want to go down to, where was it? Like, terrain is one of the things that has been kind of classified a little bit here. There's some bigger things we're going to talk about, but terrain is a big one. There's a big part of terrain on like page, what is this, 12? Maybe, oh no, I think it starts on page 11. They're talking about terrain, and there's different types of terrain now. And they're more, I think there's the things that we all use. Like, we all use the term scatter terrain, but I don't think it was clearly identified. Right, so that basically scatter terrain represents small terrain features, crates, planters, lamp posts, things like that. Small terrain features. Barricades, I believe, are still also scatter terrain, and of course it says that right there. But then they have area terrain. Area terrain is, a lot of us have seen area terrain is something that you can have your characters step on, and kind of, it covers a larger footprint, but it's not as something as big as a building. A building would be something more like obstacle terrain, whereas area terrain is going to be something like, they use the crashed ATST as an example. It's a decent enough example. I think it's the best example they have out of something that they make. Like the bunker, for example, would be obstacle terrain. If we're talking about FFG, or Asmodee, sold products. But if you've ever laid down like a piece of felt with some trees on it, you considered that area terrain. That's probably a better example. But I think they wanted to show stuff that is in their product catalog for the most part. Even though there are some kind of handmade buildings kind of in the backgrounds of some of these shots. But in addition to that, they talk about how terrain is going to be restricting movement. A lot of this is kind of the same stuff we've seen already, but there's also different categories, right? So you've got scatter area and obstacle, and then you have open terrain, difficult terrain, and impassable terrain. And there's a little bit more clarification put into like these things. Like impassable terrain is like, you can't even climb over it. If you decide that something's going to be impassable terrain, what does that really mean? For example, like if I have a river, like a violent river that nobody, even with expert climber or whatever, even with scale or whatever, couldn't like, you might think they could go through it, but if we decide this is going to be an impassable thing, or maybe it's a laser fence or something like that. But I like the idea of a river, right? Like, maybe it's not that high. Maybe it doesn't have a height limit to it, but you can't cross there. And the only way you could cross impassable terrain would be like a Jedi with like jump, or a repulsor vehicle, like a snow speeder might be able to fly over it, right? And of course, depending on the height, because you still have to have height for those things too. And so it all goes into discussions that you're going to have at the beginning of the game. But what they've done is they've kind of streamlined a lot more rules and guidance into terrain than we had in the initial rule books. So that's interesting, but you can read over that as you will. But I think that's worth noting. I think it's a big addition to the rules. Another really important thing that's going to affect some of the new cards that we've been looking at, and some of the things that some of you were certain was going to be one way or another, that's going to affect a lot of newer cards, is the at, within, and beyond. Now this is all redefined. This is going to be on page. What page number is this? 11. This is pretty cool. So one of the main thing I want to draw your attention to, within and beyond, I think are pretty clear. But at, basically, there's no more donuts. There was, IG, I think it was IG-11 or IG-88 has this, like, that had that range 2 donut attack or whatever. And then Ruthlessness on Moff Gideon says anybody at range 2, can get this Ruthlessness effect. And a lot of people are saying, okay, but if you're at range 1, then you don't get it because you have to be at range 2. So they're redefining at as if it's got only one number, then that's the maximum, and it goes in from there. So there's basically all of the donuts have been turned into jelly donuts, right? And so they're completely filled in, and Moff Gideon is the jelly. If that's your takeaway, if you take away one thing from this, remember that Moff Gideon is the jelly. You're always at, you're always within your at range of yourself. You're always at range of yourself. So like Moff Gideon can also would benefit from something that had an ad unless it said other people ad, and things like that. But that's an important one. That changes a couple of things. That changes the bubble from the IG. It also changes Moff Gideon's ruthlessness, making him a lot better. But there's other things that are going to make him partially worse. Let me talk about some of the Moff Gideon stuff first. Fire support is going to be an interesting one. So I'm going to go to fire support. I'm just doing Control F and jumping to fire support. Again, so it works great. It's a PDF, right? So you're going to be able to do search functions really easy. So fire support has been changed a little bit. In the past, you had the option, although I don't think it ever really happened, that if you had fire support and you had arsenal, you could add X weapons per mini with arsenal. Basically what we were thinking, according to I just done some builds with this, like an ATST can now get fire support with Gideon. If it does, and it's going to do fire support, can only add one weapon. Each miniature can only add one weapon. That's the biggest change to fire support. There's another smaller change in here. Let's see. So when another friendly unit performs a ranged attack during the form attack pool step, an unengaged unit with the fire support keyword that has a face supporter token may choose to add one eligible weapon to the pool, including any weapon keyboards, for each miniature. So a lot of people read this as they can only add one weapon. That's going to really hurt like clones that have a Z6. No, that's for each miniature. So each miniature can add one weapon. If they're doing it. So my first read through this was like, oh man, they put another nerf to clones. Well, clones did get another big nerf, but it wasn't in the form of this. So for each miniature that has line of sight to at least one miniature in the enemy unit, after using the fire support keyword, turn that unit's face order up down for this one. If fire support's not an attack, it only adds the weapon, but you still add the weapon's keywords. So if you're fire supporting with a weapon that has critical X or whatever, you're still adding that to the pool as well. Only one unit can use the fire support keyword while another unit is forming an attack pool. A unit can only use the fire support keyword to add weapons to one attack pool. So I think there was some cases, where where certain units might be able to add fire support to like multiple different attack pools, and I think it was a corner case, or like Rex I think could do that. But so that's another smaller change to fire support. But I think the bigger thing here is Imperial players that were expecting they'd be able to have General Vice coming in and fire support, like adding like 3 or more different weapons to an attack pool. That's not going to be able to happen. You're going to have to choose one. So now it's like, well, maybe I don't want to use an ATST for fire support because that's an awfully expensive unit just to only be able to, to spend their whole activation, to just add one weapon. So, but it's something to think about. It is something to think about. I mean, I think there's still a place for that, and I think it could still be fun. But, I don't know if it would be quite as broken. That's still a big dice pool to add, though, if you use the main gun on an ATST. So I think those are some of the big changes that are going to impact the way that Gideon and the Dark Troopers are going to play. We didn't see any changes so far that would change the way Dark Troopers would be built. And what I mean by that is Dark Troopers are going to... they still have like the ability to take personnel, and everything we've seen so far with Dark Troopers and their personnel are still allow them to take like the Imperial comms guy and or something like that. So and I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about things like taking the Imperial officer. The Imperial officer adds 1 courage, and and if they have a courage value that's null, and that's actually talked about. Null courage value here, and it is they have a null courage value, but it doesn't count as 0. So how does adding 1 to a null courage value matter? The expectation is that the Death Troopers card is going to somehow see an errata that say that they can't somehow take an Imperial officer or an Imperial comms tech or something like that, because otherwise there'd be no point to having the Death Trooper mini at 30-something points, when you can just get the same exact thing for for less than half of that price, and also get better benefit. So I don't even think it's really a question that really needs to be asked, but it might be good future proofing to decide, hey, what happens if you do add 1 to a null courage value? Does it become 1, or are you not, or is null not eligible to be increased? If by a simple mathematics, unless it's changed by a direct effect, adding 1 you know, I don't know, but I'm curious. Like that could be a good future proofing on the next round, on the next go around. So at least currently, it still looks like the Dark Troopers are possibly going to be able to take these. I don't really think that's going to happen, but these rules don't contradict that just yet. We let's talk about the next thing. Scale. Scale is a popular one. Scale's not as good as it used to be, right? A unit with the scale keyword performs a climb. It may move a vertical distance up to height 2. So we talked about this before. Clamber is gone. And it talks about it in here. If you haven't already seen, Clamber is gone. In replacing Clamber is just the regular climb action that basically lets you do a speed 1 move, and basically you can ignore the height distance of up to height 1. So scale lets you basically just do a climb and up to height 2. Now it says not the same as jump 2, because jump allows you to use your normal movement value. The only thing that would be fine is if it was on like snow troopers or something or any speed 1 unit. Well, they're just going to go speed 1 anyway. So like a Jedi or a Mando or something like that, that's a speed 2 or speed 3 that has jump, is still going to be able to jump like speed 2 or speed 3 like they normally would. If you were going to climb, you would have to reduce speed to speed 1 and then normally height 1, but scale makes it height 2. Scale also does give you the benefit of the your gear that lets you ignore the difficult terrain, so it doesn't have to when it performs a move, it doesn't have to reduce its maximum speed if it overlaps difficult terrain as well. So you have both. You have both options, right? You have the gear, the climbing gear, and then the other upgrade. Nobody ever uses it, but scale it's not as good as it used to, because you used to get like the free climb and the move kind of baked into the one thing. So scale used to be really good. This is largely seen as a big nerf to like Wookiees and to like characters like General Grievous that kind of depended on that mobility to get into range to do things. And so I'm curious if in the next balance pass, if Wookiees and Grievous might get a points reduction. I would expect Grievous to be like the biggest offender here. I still think Wookiees can be pretty successful. Grievous has a harder time being as successful. Grievous kind of gets a proxy nerf, or proxy buff, I guess you could say. Because dodge tokens have kind of been a little bit nerfed when it applies to Jedi. So let's talk about deflect. Deflect is another thing that was changed. And it's a pretty good segue. I don't think deflect was next on my list of things to talk about, but I want to talk about it anyway. So I'm just gonna scroll down on deflect. One funny thing. So deflect has been changed. But if you search the rule book, at least right now, like the Luke Skywalker cards that are in the background, like the text on the Luke Skywalker cards are still there. It's the old version of deflect, right? Now, of course, this is the printed Luke Skywalker card, so it's all there. But I think, unless I imagine this would be errated, because deflect's definition is now changed. It basically only works in ranged, but if you're reading it off of the card that's in the rule book, it's the old version. So that's just a minor little thing. I'm sure some people might notice, but I want to get you to if we get past all the old versions, we can get to deflect, and boom. All right, the deflect unit keyword. When a unit has a deflect keyword, if it's defending against a ranged attack, if it spends a dodge token, it's going to gain during the dodge and cover step. It's a surge conversion chart gains surge to block, and then the attacker suffers 1. It sounds the same. The key difference here is it only applies if they're defending against a ranged attack. Deflect used to also work against melee attacks, but you wouldn't get the return damage, but you at least got the surge to defense option. And so now, if you're dueling another Saber user, it's going to make all of the Saber users basically are going to be hurt by this, because they, more attacks are actually going to get through. This is largely seen as a nerf to a lot of Jedi and stuff, but in a different case, like dodge or block rather, block still works, right? Block should be in here. You look at it, block, when a unit with block keyword is defending, if it spends any dodge tokens, it gains this. So block doesn't have to be against. So Grievous has a small advantage against the Jedi in that his dodge tokens actually still give him, defensive surge in melee, whereas the Jedi, they can still spend a dodge token in melee, but it would just be a dodge. It wouldn't give them any defensive surge. So this is kind of a nerf to Jedi, especially against non-Jedi, like stormtroopers or Wookiees or whoever wants to just surround them and bombard them. They're gonna have a harder time defending that. They're still, and the Jedi are still immune to pierce, but if you're just trying to Zerg a Jedi, they're gonna die a lot quicker. Well, because they can't get that defensive surge in melee anymore. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I always have the hardest time with Jedi. Maybe I don't play them well enough or whatever, but I thought they needed a buff rather than a nerf. And I don't know if that was intended or unintended, but it was written that way. So it's probably going to stay that way. Maybe that it means more force powers are coming that might have been, again, I think there's going to be more upgrades and things coming. Maybe maybe there was going to be some new mechanic or that would be broken with or something like that. Or maybe there's a whole new upgrade pack coming. I mean, from what we've seen with like Ahsoka not really Ahsoka yet, but Asajj Ventress and a lot of the recent stuff like Gideon, for example. He comes with the Darksaber, but that's like the only upgrade he comes with. So they're not really packaging new upgrades with the expansions anymore. So where are all the new upgrades? Where's all the new tech? Maybe there's going to be an upgrade pack coming. I think that's kind of cool. I actually kind of prefer that, but at the same time, it was a really cool opportunity to bundle new tech with stuff. But it also hurts players that don't want to, if something only came in one faction, Burst of Speed only came with Yoda at first, and then a lot of people had to buy Yoda that didn't want to play Gar and stuff. So if you were to not include Burst of Speed there, but then include it in an upgrade card pack, it just works better for everybody. So I hope they're working on another upgrade card pack. I would bet you that they're working on one. But that's a subject for a whole nother video. Let's talk some more about some of these other things. While I do that, I want to remind everybody about some amazing tokens. By the way, our sponsor today is Luxury Playstyle. Full metal tokens. They're absolutely fantastic. You've heard me talk about them, and I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, I know they're great. But you talk about them all the time. It's because I love them. They're absolutely fantastic. You should check them out. You go over to luxuryplaystyle.com, check out all the different games that they have tokens that are compatible with, like games like X-Wing, Magic the Gathering, L5R, Keyforge, lots of, and of course Star Wars Legion. You're going to save 15% by using code Crabbok VIP. These are the best tokens available, folks. They are absolutely magnificent, and they're going to make you want to play Legion even more once you get your hands on these things. They're gorgeous. Head over to Luxury Playstyle. Don't forget code Crabbok VIP to save 15%. All right, so next up, let's talk about strike teams and leaders, and there's some pretty interesting stuff that I think is going to that's going to work with this. I want to see if I can find where it is in here. So basically, there's a new rule in here that says that leaders can only be assigned a wound if maybe I'm not going to find it. There's over 108 instances of leader in here. I can't really bookmark these beforehand. But all right, so regardless of where it is in here, there's a new rule in here that says that leaders basically cannot be assigned a wound unless they are the last miniature in the unit. Now, this has a big change on how strike teams are typically run in modern day game. Now, we've heard our talk about like, oh, we can only get so many, shots in. We can't, you can't scope people anymore. That was a big thing. You can't say, oh, I can only see your heavy, so I'm shooting him. He has to die. Well, now I can assign the wounds wherever I want, but I can't put them on my leader unless my leader is the last person. He just cannot be assigned them, which is particularly interesting. So in the case of strike teams, this is going to be a big impact to strike teams because if you have your leader is the sniper, so the sniper has to be out and available to shoot, and they always like to hide the other person behind. And I get that because and you might still do that because at least you're going to get heavy cover that way, right? But depending, you might be behind a barricade and then it doesn't matter as much. But this way, if I shoot your sniper, all of a sudden, you used to be able to say, oh, well, the leader dies, and then he's reborn into the new guy. And since the leaders can't take the wound, now you have to kill the backup guy first, and that means the next shot coming in, your sniper's still out in the open. And so in order for your strike teams to try to stay super survivable, you're going to have to shoot and then move out. And then maybe the next turn, move and then shoot, and then you'll be stuck, And so it's going to change the way strike teams are played. It makes them a little bit less invulnerable, so I like that. I think that's cool. It means like 2 shots, you can still kill a sniper. I think it's very cool. I like that. It fixes a lot of the leader rule for me, although it does look like force choke can still go to a specific miniature. So like if you can still force choke a heavy. I guess you can still, I don't really know what's going to happen if you try to force choke a leader despite that rule. That's probably in here somewhere. So that's something that I'll be looking forward to in the in the more in-depth read through, because a lot of it's just been kind of like the first pass over. I want to talk about Covert Ops, because this one is a pretty interesting change that normally you could play Iden Versio or Cassian Andor as your commander and run them with Covert Ops. They could say, hey, you know what, I'm the commander, but I want to be a special forces. And then all of a sudden, you have to hire, you have to recruit, you have to name a new commander. And there was a timing window for all of that. Well, now it says you cannot. When a unit with Covert Ops keyword deploys during setup, it may change its rank to operative for all purposes of the rest of the game and gain infiltrate. If it changes its rank to operative, or it cannot change this rank to operative if there are no commander units in that player's army, which is particularly interesting. Now, I'm curious how this will work, and this is probably something that needs to be asked, or may have already been asked on the rules reference forum, on how this will work with field commander. Because field commander is also worded now to change your rank to commander, and but it only does that if you don't have one. So I think the way that the timing ought to work is, okay, I can Covert Ops because I have a field commander who can then step up. It's just like which one happens first. I can't Covert Ops because I don't have another commander, but I can't make my field commander my commander because I have the Covert Ops guy who's still commander. So it's kind of, it's just a timing thing. I think realistically, and the flavor of the game kind of says that, well, yeah, I should be able to do that. So that's something I'm going to have to await for a ruling on. But yes, so that's pretty interesting. It does kind of nerf some of the Cassian Andor and Iden Versio kind of strats and stuff. So maybe you have to bring a generic officer now or something like that. You might have to change some of your builds to make that work, or just don't deploy them with infiltrate. Speaking of infiltrate, there are some interesting rules as it applies to the start of the game. You can't start the game in base contact with another unit. You can't start in a melee. You can't move into the melee before the game started. You can't do any of that. So you are going to have to basically start either close or not there. Same goes for objective tokens. You can't start in base contact with an objective. It's not allowed anymore. You can be kind of close. So all those infiltrate units that wanted to do something crazy, like if you had infiltrate and you're playing with Scout 1 or something like that, you can't move to start a melee at the very, very beginning of the game. So you can do on the first round, you can activate that way, but you can't start that way. So I think that's pretty interesting. Let's see. We got some other interesting things. There's a new word that's got thrown around called turn. And this caused a little bit of confusion, and it was already answered and clarified. So if you're reading through this, there's a rule in here that says you can only attack once per turn. A unit can only attack once per turn. You can get free attack actions, but you can only take an attack action to attack once per turn. And I mean, that sounds kind of standard and everything. I said we don't use the word to turn. I tend to think of turn as like the whole, the first turn, the first round. Round and turn, I would have thought were synonymous. Turn is kind of like a new Legion term now. And it's virtually synonymous with activation. But because you can pass now, and this is another one of the new rules. We talked about this in the early prelude stuff, because you can pass once per round if you have fewer available activations than your opponent. This counts the face-up and the face-up tokens that are on the board plus the tokens that are still in the bag, right? So if you have fewer than your opponent, you can pass. The way you might have a power turn where you kill like 1 or 2 units, and then all of a sudden your opponent then turns up passing. So those things can happen, but you can only pass once per round. It's called a turn because when you pass, that's your turn, but there won't be an activation, right? So turn is the term that applies to an activation even if there's not an activation. So when it's your turn, you're going to do something, activate a unit. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be to activate a unit, and then it goes to your opponent and it's their turn. So when it says a unit can only activate or can only attack once per turn, they mean once during that activation, effectively. But the reason I think it's called turn is probably good future proofing, because who knows what else might happen to let somebody kind of do an extra attack action during, like, maybe like think of Palpatine with pulling the strings. He can have somebody else do a free attack. But what if there was a supercharged version of that or whatever that, could stack with it, and it's there to, I think, just good future proofing. So and there was also a big question as it applied to the Dark Troopers, because they have 2 order tokens, and they could want to potentially, like, hey, we activate, we're going to move and shoot, and we're going to activate, we're going to move and shoot, right? And so can they not attack on the second activation? Because if they can only attack once per turn. So a lot of those questions were going around. They absolutely can. They work as you would think that they would work. Same thing goes with Vader for Implacable. You shuffle his order token back into the pool. You can activate Vader a second time, right? And there may be other characters that you can activate a second time. Yeah, it will count as a second activation. It counts as like a whole separate turn for the rules purposes. So that's something to keep in mind. That's also talked about in this document. There's a really interesting thing with the Force that I think is worth talking about. And I want to try and find it in here. It talks about units with the Force symbol, this symbol right here. And is it in here? Oh, wait. Force upgrade cards. Yes, right here. So this is a cool thing. This isn't going to change much for anybody, but I think it's just worth mentioning because I like to speculate, and this one has fueled my speculation engine. It says Force upgrade cards. If a unit has a Force upgrade card equipped, measure the range of any effects on the card from the unit's unit leader. In other words, so like if Luke Skywalker is trying to force push somebody, you measure that range from Luke Skywalker because he is the unit leader. Why is that important? What if, and I don't think this is going to happen specifically, but I think we're going to basically get Force users that go into a multi-miniature unit at some point. Maybe not anytime soon. It's probably just good future proofing. I think there's a lot of things in here that are just spelling out things we already know, but they're good future proofing. Like we might, in theory, see a Special Forces group that is the Ghost Crew. Right? Like maybe you get a Special Forces team, maybe it's like a 300 or 400 point unit, and it's Kanan and Ezra and Hera and Chopper and Zeb and Sabine. You get the whole crew together. Like, wouldn't that be awesome? That'd be absolutely fantastic. Or it might mean like generic Jedi. Maybe you get a Jedi and a Padawan, and they're like generic Special Forces or something like that. Maybe the Padawan can take a Force upgrade, like a counterpart. We've seen counterparts, C-3PO, right? There's counterpart, Iden Versio's little droid. You got counterparts already. What would happen if you had a counterpart that was a Force user? All right, Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe is one potential thing, although I do think that Chirrut would be the leader and Baze would be the counterpart, but maybe it goes the other way around. Or maybe you get a heavy weapons version of Luke Skywalker that just decides he's going to tag along into a Rebel Troopers. Any of those potential things could lead to a case where maybe there's a Force upgrade on somebody that is not the unit leader. And when we're measuring range, you're going to do it from the unit leader. Usually you tend to measure range on attacks from the unit leader. Well, not just usually, that is how that works. So I can see them doing something like that. So this is just, I think it's good future proofing. So you're not trying to I'm going to move here, I'm going to cohesify Luke Skywalker all the way up there, and now he's able to force push you. No, because that would be gaming the system a little bit. So anyway, no immediate change here, but this is both a telltale sign of possibilities yet to come, as well as good future proofing. So I'm really excited about this little thing right here. So I thought that was really cool. Let's talk about vehicles, vehicle silhouettes. Vehicle silhouettes are seeing some interesting changes. Let's see if I can find SIL silhouette. How do I even spell silhouette? SILH silhouette. Is that it? Yes, silhouette. All right. Yeah, it's not a word that I type out very often. All right. So it's page 27 on silhouettes. So let's jump down to page 27. Do. All right. And so this page has a lot of information on the silhouettes. We've already talked about a lot of it. The small base silhouette is basically there. These little wings on the side are just there for you to like kind of line it up. You ignore the little wings, right? And you put the little white dot on the bottom. Notched base troopers are going to have a taller silhouette. This one up here. It's sideways because it's easier for them to fit it on the page that way. But they're going to be like 50% taller than normal minis, notched base minis. Think of if they're troopers, notched base troopers. Not just minis. So the dewback, for example, it's actually pretty tall, right? You're going to use that silhouette, and it's a whole dome from the base. So it's not saying that dewbacks are now only super narrow. It's the whole base. But this also applies to things like your E-web, or your heavy weapons, your mortars, and your detachment troopers and things like that. Units that are actually pretty low to the ground are still going to have that tall silhouette. That's a little immersion breaking for some things, but at least they had to standardize it. There are definitely some changes in here that do break immersion, but are also kind of there just for cleaner and simpler rules. And that's both good and bad. I understand both sides. Some people aren't crazy about some of these. Some people think they're great. I see both sides. I kind of lean a little more towards immersion, but I understand the need for a cleaner, simpler rule set. Especially if you're a TO somewhere and you're like, no, gosh, there's so many like corner cases. We need to standardize all of this so it's very clear. And I think the silhouettes sort of do that. So I like that, and also it gives you a little more flexibility to mod your stuff a little weirder and stuff like that, which is always fun. Just don't mod it too weird, because you could be in some tournament trouble, right? Like there's a certain generally modding your stuff is pretty fine, as long as it's mostly still recognizable and it's still mostly the same thing. But some of the interesting stuff is it applies to silhouettes. We've already talked about vehicle silhouettes. They go up to the tallest part of the vehicle, and it's a full like cylinder from where we're already at. But vehicle silhouettes here are getting some interesting changes, because a vehicle now blocks, a ground vehicle blocks line of sight. Even if it is immersion breaking, they completely block line of sight. An ATRT is now a moving house that is completely blocking line of sight for its silhouette. Now, if I can still see you through the outside of the base, you may not block an entire miniature unit, right? But now, they block line of sight up to the height, and that goes up to the height of the tallest part of the actual chassis. You ignore the little thing like antennas and some of the things like that, but it goes up to the point of where the chassis pretty much stops. You ignore like the pilot's head, so things like the tank. You just pick the tallest part of the hull, and that's where that sort of stuff stops. But yeah, so like even walking an ATST, clearly we can see through the legs of the ATST, but not anymore. Can't see through it. Cannot see through it. That's one of those changes that really breaks immersion. A lot of people are probably not going to be thrilled with that idea. And of course, you don't have to play that way at home if you don't want to, right? Like, but these are designed for, like, they have to apply these to tournaments. Sometimes people get really rules sticklers, and maybe you kind of can't. Maybe they're at the spot in the leg where I can't quite see through them, and you're arguing, oh, but I think I can see the little bit of a shoulder, and they use the silhouette tool for that. But still, I think it's cleaner. I don't know. I don't want to defend it. I think it's kind of a bummer, like, to break immersion. Like, I can't shoot under the legs at all anymore. But I think it cleans up things like being able to shoot under the AA5 bus, where you're like, wait, my guy's gun is up here. Am I saying that he's shooting from the ankle? Is that what's happening? Is that all these guys shooting from the ankle? Because do they have to take a move action to get down into the prone position and do all this weird stuff? So there were a lot of weird cases there. So that's an example of like why it fixes one problem but kind of breaks immersion, because it kind of creates another problem. And like, why can't I see you? You're right there. There's just an ATST standing in between us. So yeah, that's so basically, yeah, ground vehicles are doing that now. Now, repulsor vehicles like flyers, like your snow speeder, That one is really interesting because that one, like the silhouette starts at the mini and then goes up to the top of the hull of the mini. So it's like a floating disc. It's not just this giant moving building for repulsor vehicles. But your ground vehicles or I believe your hover vehicles that are treated like ground vehicles are still basically blocking. So your tanks and your AA5s and stuff like that are going to be big fortresses. And I think that could be a little bit of help to some Jedi. I know there's a lot of maps that don't have, like, I don't have an approach vector that I can conceal myself. Well, now you can run a tank and run Darth Maul behind the tank, and maybe he can actually get to the enemies and not be killed before he gets there. Maybe. So I think that so again, there's some good and some bad with it, right? Like, it's a mixed bag, but I think it's just more standardized. So that's kind of cool. Let's talk about let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Cumbersome. Cumbersome got an interesting change. I think we're through with most of the biggest changes. So this is interesting. Cumbersome used to be like you couldn't attack and move, right? So you can't perform a move prior to an attack unless you pivot, which means that you can attack and then move, which is kind of a big upgrade to Cumbersome. You used to not be able to do the two. You just have to like move and stand by or aim and stand by. And so now you can attack and then move, which is kind of cool. I kind of like it. So that's like another, there's a lot of just little things. We talked about a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of stuff they talk about when you withdraw, that it's, the rules basically spell out, you can't do any free actions. But a lot of people are like, so dewbacks and tauntauns don't get the shot anymore. But they double check, read the whole thing, because if you go to creature troopers, they have like, no, they still get to do their stuff. So like your dewbacks and tauntauns, they still get their free shot after they withdraw. So a lot of little things like that aren't changed as much as you might think they're changed on the initial read through. So a lot of little things like that. I think that's most of the biggest stuff. There's going to be more as we go through all of this that we talk about. Unfortunately, the things that are most significantly changed are not in blue. And one of the reasons that it was said is, like otherwise the whole document would be all blue, right? And the whole thing would be all blue. So it's, they still have the leader rule here. If a miniature with the leader keyword and a wound threshold of 2 is defeated while unit with wound threshold of 1, that's talking about all of that stuff. But that's So regardless, there's a whole lot of changes, a whole lot of stuff to really read through. Some of this stuff is probably not gonna. There's probably some things in here and some interactions we haven't even noticed yet. Some things that may still get, changed a little bit more on the next time around. For example, like showing the original Luke Skywalker card with the incorrect deflect, earlier in the thing. So if you're searching for deflect, somebody might be like, I can see on Luke Skywalker's card what deflect does. It's in the rule book, So those are things I think will probably get changed. Like, I don't think this is the final version of this. Again, these books are always living. They're living documents, so they can always make little changes. But I think for the most part, it's pretty well put together. It's pretty clean, and hopefully I touched on most of the bigger parts. We talked about passing and clamber, not being able to do that anymore. There's other just little things. Like, there's something about like terrain in here that you can't have a miniature kind of like sideways, and there's no like trooper miniatures can't like overhang anymore. I don't know if that was really much of an issue, but it could happen. The Ewoks are actually in here too. I guess the Ewoks are probably going to have incognito. I think that is probably because Chewbacca, they said that Chewbacca would have incognito in the ATST. So there's going to be at least an incognito Ewok token. And we also saw the incognito, or not the incognito, but we saw, I'm distracted right now because the 5-part range ruler above me only has 4 parts. So that's something else they can adjust, right? 5-part range ruler has 4 parts. So, I don't think I'm the first person to notice that, but that was just like, that's so funny. There's just a lot of stuff in here. All right, guys, hopefully I summarized enough of it. Make sure you let me know. If you have any more questions, you can jump in our Discord. You can ask them down in the comments section. There's plenty of communities out there to help answer you, and hopefully our communities here on the channel and within are great for you guys, you know, to help you, whether you're just starting out or coming back into Legion or trying to kind of absorb all of these rules. Hopefully this was helpful to you. One last thing, as it applies to transports, I wanted to talk about, which is kind of interesting. It's like more of a corner case, but like closed transports. We talked about how you can't be drawn line of sight anymore when you're inside them, so it can't snipe you anymore with Din Djarin's rifle. You know, that's cool, and I think that makes sense. But also, it takes 2 actions to embark. It kind of always took, but it used to take your whole activation to embark. Now it takes just 1 additional action to embark. Why does that matter? For units that get a bonus action, like if you're playing Darth Maul, or if you gain a bonus action from Ruthlessness or Darth Vader's command card, right? If you're playing something to give yourself, if you're going to possibly have more than 2 actions in a turn, you could, in theory, attack and then embark. Although you still can never embark and then disembark in the same turn. So I think that's kind of interesting. Again, we'll keep seeing more. There's a lot of these little things that are either just more streamlined or that are slightly changed. You know, and most of them make sense to me. So I don't think this is quite as big and sweeping as, you know, the rules change that happen like with X-Wing. For the most part, I think it is more streamlined and still should feel very much like your games of Legion that you already knew and loved. It'll be interesting to see how terrain and tables are kind of changed, and if tables get built a little bit more now that everybody has climb. You know, you're not taking damage for clamber anymore. You could probably do a lot more buildings, right? And like maybe that'll be a fun thing to do. We'll have to wait and see. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are absolutely amazing. We are still giving away that $25 Amazon gift card. A couple more days left in that giveaway. Make sure you enter. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. You guys are all awesome. May the force be with you, and have a fantastic day.